Welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and today we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 8, Mega Match. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in. So, episode summary. We see the end of a Betadrome match between Peyton and Kaz, who are now tied at 13 wins each in their competitive rivalry. They dream up a mega match to break the tie once and for all, but Sarah comes to grab Kaz for a scan quest as repayment for helping her get a Geltod scan. So Tom and Peyton decide to do the mega match for themselves and not let the idea go to waste. Kaz and Sarah go looking for a Mandiblore crown that Sarah threw down a Danian trash chute, and in the trash area, a group of Danians are also searching for this Mandiblore crown. Kaz finds the crown by sitting on it, and then they get their scans, and Sarah puts it on and joins the hive call that is sent out to defend the trash area against a creature. Kaz then saves Sarah by taking the Mandiblore crown off her head, and they pour out. And back in the Betadrome, Tom and Peyton both fell asleep in the Betadrome during their marathon mega match. So that's the episode we're dealing with. Analysis. I don't really have a whole lot of analysis for this episode off the top of my head. Like, this episode is, pretty normal setup. It's an A-B plot. It uses the tail end of the Betadrome match as a hook. You're hooked right into the action of the story. And it ends with a comedic button of Tom and Peyton sleeping in the Betadrome. And I would say the actual, meat and potatoes of this episode lie with the Sarah Kaz storyline, who have to overcome Sarah getting possessed by the Mandiblore crown. And these plot lines don't really overlap or intersect or have that much connective tissue between them thematically, besides in the setup and conclusion when all four characters are in the same place at the same time. And so something I do notice as I scrub through the episode is the color palette, and that would be the mega match, the 105 versus 105 creature match, is very bright and colorful with different creatures and different characters and different backgrounds, whereas the Danians storyline is more muted. The Danian storyline has a lot of dark, neutral browns, and, right, it's very dark and neutral in terms of palette just overall. And even the background and the Danian troopers themselves all kind of live in this earthy, dark, natural palette. And including the invader, who's this green, it's still kind of in that realm of natural, opposed to the mega match is bright and colorful. And so this differentiation in color palette helps to clue in the audience which plotline they're looking at, even without the context of characters, right? Without the context of plot, if I just showed you a frame from this episode, you would be able to tell, is this in the A plot or the B plot? Is this with Tom and Peyton or with Kaz and Sarah? And so it just helps the audience more easily switch between the two plot lines as they, continually shift back and forth. So I could show you just two random characters in a bright locale, right? Get a bright background, and we'll automatically understand that it's the Peyton and Tom plotline in the Betadrome because, it has that color palette. And they show the green and brown trash with the, neutral characters and monster. We understand that it's the Danian trash bin just by context of the color palette, right? We don't need to know which two creatures are Tom and which one is Peyton because we understand it's the two of them, right? We don't need to set up that they have these creatures in their deck because we just understand by the context of the color palette that it is Peyton and Tom. Now, the premise of this episode also calls back to the Scavenger Scan episode where they established the Kaz Peyton rivalry dynamic and how they're evenly matched, but they just have this continuing, ongoing friendly competition. And so when we jump into the episode with them being tied up again, it gels with the previous character development that they've done in the past, right? It makes sense that this competitive rivalry is ongoing and continuing to happen, but that's like normal everyday circumstances. And for a narrative story, for a plot line, you don't want just an everyday plot. The reason we tell a story is because it's a break in the norm. There's some sort of inciting incident that deviates from the status quo. And Kaz and Peyton having this rivalry has been established as a status quo. And so when we jump into this episode, when it's tied up again, it gels, yes, with that previous character dynamic, but they have to put a spin on it to make it interesting, to make it a new episode. So they could have easily done another Kaz and Peyton focused episode that would have been engaging and would have been lighthearted and fun and would have been interesting, but they almost refuse to show us something that they've done before, and so they rip apart that plotline with Sarah stealing Kaz, resulting in the concept of this episode which pairs Peyton and Tom and Kaz and Sarah, which I feel like feels like an unusual pairing, but, works nonetheless. And then I guess, should we talk about the mega match itself? Once again, our characters are innovating in the beta drum space, as I like to say. It's an 105 creature match versus 105 creature match. And this turns out to be more of a test of endurance than an actual battle, and this really plays into the stubbornness of our characters. We know Tom is stubborn, and Tom always has been. Peyton is motivated less by stubbornness, but more by his own competitive qualities. Peyton is playing into being stubborn, but like the motivation itself is his competitive nature. Whereas Tom, yes, has that competitive nature, but just more as a character trait is stubborn. And so putting these two characters into a stalemate, which, results in nap time, is an interesting setup because you're playing into two qualities of these characters that, when pitted against each other, create this setup. I also guess we have to talk about the beta drum a little bit. I have some questions, like, is there a time limit on the beta drum, or is it just gonna be awkward when one of them wakes up and then, like, defeats the other while they're asleep and still coded? And then would they wake up when they get back into the drum, or like would they have to manually wake each other up, or would they just time out the session? Like, I don't know, it's funny to think about, like, what happens when they wake up. Are they going to continue on the match? But that's more of a lore question. So should we talk about lore? So we do get some lore in this episode, mainly about the Danians. The Danians have a waste disposal system with trash chutes all over Mount Pillar to streamline, the ease of throwing trash away. And they lead into this junkyard, which is somewhere under Mount Pillar. Now, is it above or below the water reservoir? I would guess below, but also, it could be above. Not out of the question. And we also get knowledge on the Mandalore crown, which I think the concept of the Mandalore crown itself has some interesting implications because it is another way to convert creatures into acting like Danians or to align with Danian interests. And the Mandalore crown and the concept of Danian parasites, which were also established this season, are both tools that the Danians use to influence creatures of non-Danian allegiance to act in favor with Danian interest. And so I think it shows that the Danian strategy of gaining political control is conversion, and I think they're trying to convert other creatures into members of their tribe from their original state, but it's really a numbers game. The more Danians they have, the easier it is for them to gain control of Param. And so this differs from other tribes who, use force to try to gain control in Param or try to make peace. The Danian strategy is to influence. It's to try to convert, it's try to manipulate into acting in their favor. So really they're the true influencers of Param. But I think it's interesting because perhaps their strategy is, you know, use the parasites to convert creatures, or use a Mandalore crown to like brainwash them. But that's like you don't have to take over Param. if all of Param already acts in line with Danian interest, right? So they're being less forthcoming and less aggressive with their strategy of just brute force, like say maybe the Underrollers do, but they're being sneaky and manipulative and strategic, right? They are either trying to convert or trying to influence. And that is an interesting strategy when compared to the other tribes. Another piece of lore we get in this episode relates to the dromes, and that is that your human energy affects how you play in the drome. And what I mean by that is both Peyton and Tom like physically exhaust themselves in the mega match, so much so that they fall asleep as their creatures. And here's the thing, we know scanned creatures come with energy statistics, they come with their stats. And so in this episode, we learn that that creature energy does not inherently energize the player playing that creature. Like, you have to bring your own A game, you have to bring your own strengths to your creature. You can't rely on the fact that your creature has energy or that your creature has high energy. So, like, your creature being energized when you scan them has no effect on how much U energy you bring to the drone. And I think that's similar to other stats like wisdom, right? You can strategically tap into your creature's wisdom, but you have to like try to do that. You have to bring your own wisdom and your own strategy to the match in order to win. Like Maxor has locational wisdom, he knows about Kiru City. Or maybe he has like historic wisdom, he knows where things are, or he knows like the relationship's dynamics. He has an array of attacks under his belt. But you tapping into Maxor's knowledge isn't going to inherently win you a match. You as the creature have to apply that knowledge in a way that brings you your goal of winning the match. And so I think what this episode goes to show is that it's the same for energy. You can't rely on your creatures being energized in a drone match. You have to tap into it and use it to your advantage. Additionally, we get confirmation that the Betadrome matches are broadcast in the Port Court, and not just in the Betadrome dinner theater like they did in season one. And so, like, all that exploring Tom did in Prexor Chasm, that was all over the Port Court. And so, being strategic about what you do in the Betadrome, right, whether that's exploring or battling, that's open information for anyone who's interested, right? They could be watching it from the port court. They could go into the database archives and like review old matches. And so if you're being strategic about planning your scan quests or going into Param or like unlocking knowledge, spreading secrets, you have to be careful with what you're doing there because that's public information and you could be informing your opponents. And finally, the last thing for lore is in this episode, Peyton calls Tom Thomas, which of course, he could be joking and like full naming him, but it's definitely a possibility that Tom's full name is Thomas, Thomas Majors. On to fun facts and other notes. This episode is a huge episode for cameos, which, of course is great for advertising. It's good for when you pull cards, you have that recognition of, oh, I saw them on the TV show. And it's also great for world building, that these creatures actually exist in Param, and they're living lives in Param somewhere. And so I did my best to try to list and name all of the cameos and all the creatures that appear in this episode. And so let's talk about it. In kind of rapid fire order, we have Takinam and Thunder. Then we get a in-name reference only reference to Geltod. Then we have Bidwa, Bionzu, Galen, Gadup, Ario, Maglax, Mudinu, Tangus Toborn, Loma, Bathe, Odu Bathax, Banshore, Minari, Maxor, Larina, Zar. We have the overworld version of Rasnus. We have Dracnus, Blugon, Rothar, Interest, Antidion, Euro, Hotan, Orth, Bodil, and possibly Zalvar. Now, let's talk about Zalvar. In season 1, Zalvar is this blue cat creature, and here we have a blue cat creature, and, we think it's Zalvar, but he looks wildly different from how he does in season 1. And right, we've gone through the animation change, but also creatures grow and change, so it definitely could be him. So that is about 29 creatures. we see, and then, we have some verbal references. And so this episode really is a cameo fest. We have a 22-minute episode, but we have 29 individual creatures seen. That's more than one per minute. And so they really go by quick. And so my final thoughts on this episode are I like this episode. In my memory, I remember the Mega Match episode and I remember the Mandalore Crown episode. And so it feels kind of strange that they're the same episode. And both of them I like. Neutral good. The stakes aren't too high. This is more just like a day in the life, but with a twist. It's a normal chaotic adventure, if you will. And I can appreciate that kind of content. Of course, there has to be a conflict. This is narrative media. And so, like, the dating trash side quest, it does go sideways after they get the scan. And I don't know, it just seems relatively normal. It seems relatively low stakes for a chaotic episode. But with that, not every chaotic episode has to be life changing. Not, Param doesn't have to constantly be in danger because then when it is in danger, it would feel less impactful. And so, I don't know, to me, is this episode life changing? Not necessarily. And also, does it set up anything huge for later? No, not necessarily. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but also, does it show off a common battle gear and a ton of creatures? Yeah, and that's synergy. Part of Chaotic is how it transcends like mediums, and I think this is a good example of an episode that does that. It incorporates creatures and lore and a battle gear that we don't normally see, but in the real world, when you see them, you'll be more excited that you saw them because, oh, I have a Mandalore crown. That's that episode. That's really all I have to say about this episode. It's fun, it's good, and with that, I had a good time, so I'll see you next time. Bye!